Sono Mark Neocleous, professore di Scienze Politiche all'Università di Brunel, UK, e autore di diversi saggi a carattere storico-filosofico. Il suo lavoro più recente è stato verso lo sviluppo di una critica della sicurezza, che si collega col precedente lavoro sullo Stato, la costruzione dell'ordine e la mobilitazione politica della paura in una direzione. Di recente ciò ha portato ad un ampio argomento riguardante le modalità di sovrapposizione dei poteri di guerra e di polizia. Teorico critico si concentra sulle questioni del potere dello Stato, in particolare quelli di polizia, la sicurezza e la guerra, poteri che possono essere radunati, catturati sotto l'etichetta di pacificazione, e ha lavorato a numerosi progetti in questo ambito. What is pacification?
Okay, so thanks very much to TNI for organising this, and thanks in particular to the local campaigns for being so welcoming and hosting this. So the logic of progress, development and improvement have long been categories through which the ruling class justifies its acts in the name of accumulation. The horizon of today's contemporary struggles is dominated by struggles over modes of subsistence, uses of land and forms of life. Yet at the heart of these struggles there still exists a demand on the part of the ruling class that progress, development and improvement have to happen. Examples range from the North Dakota pipeline to the high-speed train across the Alps, from fracking in the UK and elsewhere to the local struggles taking place in this very region. So I want to argue that we might think about these things through the lens of pacification. And what this means, in effect, is that I want to argue generally two things. The first is for pacification as a key concept for thinking about the power of state and capital. And secondly, that pacification allows us to think through the productive nature of violence for capital, even where today's struggles seem different from past struggles. In other words, where previously I've tried to think about pacification in relation to accumulation, in a sense what I want to do is to try and think about pacification in relation to accumulation and extraction. Now, since time is short and the idea is to generate discussion, I'm going to present this in the form of 10 points. And these are deliberately polemical points, as in psychoanalysis, any truths in this paper lie in the exaggerations. So, the first point, pacification is war, but it's not war that would be called war by those working in war studies. Rather, it's a war for the systematic colonisation of the world by capital. So with its war cry, let there be accumulation, capital sets about trying to dominate and shape the world, engaging in violent enclosures to privatise common lands. In other words, pacification is war, but it's a social war of accumulation. It's what some of us used to refer to as class war. And I'm just going to add here a passing observation that this might be one way to think about pacification in conjunction with shrinking spaces, in the sense that the wars of enclosure connote the idea of pacification through spatial control, but also as spatial control. In other words, pacification involves the shrinking of spaces that are not controlled and dominated by capital. So the submission of the world's resources to capital once took the form of attempts to enclose the land, and this struggle continues in the attempt to further speed up capital's movement. So it's all about trains, planes and automobiles and energy supplies in general, right, imposing kind of new forms of enclosure, including of the sea, as you discovered yesterday. Okay, that's the end of my passing observation. Pacification has its roots in the idea of peace. This is why the term is still sometimes used very openly by some states. For example, in Brazil's police pacification units, which were established to clear the favelas for the Olympics and the World Cup, and in Mexico's recent National Reconciliation Program, which was openly called Pacification. But peace derives from the Roman Pax, and in that tradition it has much affinity with the word dominance or domination as it does with peace. Hence, when the Romans spoke of I just realised I'm explaining Romans to Italians, but it might be problematic. Okay, hence when the Romans spoke of pacifying a province, they meant that it had been conquered. So what is connoted by peace and pacification is the imposition of domination through violence. And that's my second point then, is that pacification is a conjunction of war and peace in a way that makes it more or less impossible for us to disentangle them. Now what this also implies is that from a critical perspective, peace is a deeply problematic concept. And phrases such as peaceful protest are therefore not especially useful in describing our struggles. Peaceful protest means nothing, because from the point of view of state and capital, when one engages in protest, one is by definition no longer at peace. Right, so the act of protest is a refusal, right? It's a refusal of the obedience expected from pacification. It's a refusal of one's pacified status. It's a refusal of the demand that we accept everything done in the name of progress, development, and improvement. So when expropriation is countered by the refusal of the subject becomes the enemy. Hence, and this is my third point, in the act of protest, we are declaring ourselves to be the enemy. Now, this enemy status is reinforced by the fact that the state's complicity in helping capital realise its fantasy of greater and greater and faster accumulation implies that just as the state declares itself on the side of progress, so whoever opposes this progress is the enemy of progress. For state and capital, the matter of solving a problem, right, the problem of energy supplies, the problem of developing high-speed trains, and so on, becomes a matter of defeating the enemy. A key aim of pacification is to win, retain, or regain the complicity of the pacified. So, this is my fourth point, pacification means shaping the population and building the people around the regime of accumulation being imposed on them, or us. The people must accept their obedience to capital's colonisation of the world. To achieve this, pacification requires a series of interlocking measures, right? Interlocking war and police, but also economic, cultural, and technological powers. So, looked at in a different way, this is my fifth point, pacification is at its most successful when it is least obvious. And it is least obvious when the people come to accept everything done in the name of peace, security, and progress. Now this requires mobilising the people in support of their own pacification. For example, through an ideological battle in which the people come to believe things such as the idea that capitalism and peace go hand in hand, or that liberalism is a philosophy of peace, or that the police power exists for the good of the people. For pacification to be successful, the state has to commit itself to knowing the people. This is my sixth point, which is that pacification requires the state to be an intelligence agency. And this intelligence is required because the state knows that it is at war, and that the enemy lives among the people, and even that sometimes that the enemy is the people. So to understand pacification means to understand that for the police power, we are the enemy. Now, as you will have noticed, I began with war, and I've been increasingly talking about police. And so I want to repeat a point I made about war, but this time in relation to police, and this is my seventh point, which is that pacification is an expression of the police power as much as it is an act of war. It's through the police power that the productive nature of pacification emerges. So the series of interlocking measures that I just mentioned, cultural, technological and so forth, needs to be understood as part of a very broad policing process. So now we can develop some of these points in relation to each other. Pacification is a war of accumulation conducted through the police power. Now what this means, in effect, is that the police power is engaged in a permanent war. And this explains why police language, police discourse is so full of the ideas about warfare. Police treaties, police texts, or text in police science, media statements made by senior police officers, and ethnographic work amongst rank-and-file police officers inform us time and again of the constant wars being fought by police. War against the disorderly, war against the unruly, wars against the criminals, wars against the indecent, wars against the disobedient, wars against the disloyal, wars against the lawless, and so on and on. All of which consist of a series of permanent campaigns which go some way to explaining why so many different oppressed groups refer to the police institution as like an occupying army. So as you'll see, what I'm trying to do is to use the concept of pacification to grasp the conjoined powers of war and police. Right? In pacification, the war power is a police power and the police power is a war power. Now this leads me to my 8th point, which is to stress that these conjoined powers of war and police is a way of avoiding what I think is a very banal argument, and I'm sorry I'm going to pick you up on this, Ben, because you kind of touched on it, which is a banal argument about the militarisation of policing or the rise of paramilitary policing. There's absolutely no use in complaining that the police are becoming militarised, because the police has been at war since its invention, which is precisely why police discourse is so full of the language of war. Now, to think about the war power and police powers as conjoined in pacification is to focus our minds on what really binds them. And what really binds them is security. And this is my 9th point. My 9th point is that security is pacification. Now, we find this everywhere we look in the literature. So, for example, when Brazil launched its first police pacification units in 2008, it was through Rio's security department, and they claimed to be introducing, quote, a new model of public security. What this means in turn is that at the heart of pacification theory, which is what I'm trying to develop, lies a critique of security. In effect, and to go back to the point about refusal, a refusal of the imposition of the logic of security on our lives. And again, what this means is declaring oneself to be the enemy. And let me finish with a final point about an issue which I think is going to be part of our discussions over the next couple of days. Many people have pointed out that in fighting the most significant police war of all, namely the war of accumulation, the police often act illegally, especially when using violence. Now that the police do act illegally is beyond doubt, but when they act illegally, they are doing so because it's the police view that to act solely within the law would render them ineffective. The police act in ways that to the citizen appear illegal and often are illegal because that is what the police do. For police, it matters little if the police action is legal so long as it's regarded as an efficient exercise of discretionary power for achieving order. And this is almost always accepted by the state when the police explains it in that way. So in the UK, for example, between 1990 and the end of 2017, there were over 1,600 deaths in police custody or through contact with police. And the number of these that resulted in murder or manslaughter charges, 0. And this pattern is repeated across the whole world. Now the point here is complex, but what I'm trying to suggest is that we need to recognise that police does not equal law, and that justice has never been the primary value to which the police is devoted. Now what this implies is that any account of policing which focuses on police illegality is as sterile as the approach that focuses on police militarisation. My point here, and this is my 10th and final point, and I'll finish with this, is that the main operational criteria of pacification is the same as the main operational criteria of the police power. Order rather than law, accumulation rather than justice. Thank you for listening.
Grazie.